What's good, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Hockey on the Spot with Brandon Barenfeld. I'm Brandon Barenfeld. Thank you for joining. This is episode 29 of Hockey on the Spot, continuing with the 30 teams in 30 days for the month of August. Coming to the end here for only 4 teams to go. Yesterday we did the New York Islanders. Today we have another New York team to do. So we now go into the heart of New York City to talk about our last original 6 team, the New York Rangers. And for the New York Rangers, as we all know, an excellent season in 2011-2012. They won first place in the Eastern Conference, second place in the league overall. Only the Vancouver Canucks were better. Very disappointing Eastern Conference final loss, though. They lost in 6 games to the New Jersey Devils, although they then would get a little bit of revenge this year by eliminating the Devils from playoff contention with a 4-1 win, but not before having a disappointing year in which the expectations for the team were really high. They got Rick Nash from the Columbus Blue Jackets in a blockbuster trade that sent Brandon Dubinsky, Artem Anisimov, then prospect defenseman Tim Erickson, and a first-round draft pick there. Going into the lockout shortened year, looking at the roster, the Rangers had what looked to be one of the best top lines in the National Hockey League, with Brad Richards centering Rick Nash on the right and Marian Gaborik on the left, or more often than not, Marian Gaborik on the right and Rick Nash on the left. And in the beginning, that line started off great, but then they just couldn't click, and they lost a lot of depth. Though they got a great score in Rick Nash, they lost a lot of depth. Brandon Dubinsky and Artem Anisimov were a big part of that, but also they lost Brandon Prust, they lost Ruslan Fedotenko. Those 2 guys were big parts of their depth. They ended up trading Michael Rupp to the Minnesota Wild not too long through the season. They did get Daryl Powell out of it, but it didn't help them. And the depth that they brought in to try to replace that didn't help them. Taylor Pyatt, Aaron Asham, they brought in those guys, and it really didn't help them. They did get grittier with these signings. Jeff Halpern was another one, but it didn't help them. And therefore, their season was on a downward spiral, and they just couldn't score. That was the big problem for the Rangers last year. They couldn't score, not to mention their head coach, John Tortorella. This was the season in which his bad reputation with the media took an all-time high. It really took a whole new level this season. And it just, no matter what the Rangers tried to do, they couldn't get their season in check until the day before the trade deadline. They bring in Matt Zuccarello, who came over from the KHL. They brought him back, signing him to a 1-year deal. And he actually did help them, but they still needed more. They bring in Ryan Clough from the San Jose Sharks. He actually was a big help for them physically, but he only turned out to be a rental player. Again, we'll get more into that later. But the big trade that they made the day of the trade deadline, they trade Marian Gaborik back. They trade Marian Gaborik and 2 prospect defensemen, including one that they got from the Rick Nash deal, Steve DeLeasley, to the Columbus Blue Jackets. But in return, they get a lot of depth. They get Derek Brassard. They get Derek Dorsett, who didn't play until the playoffs. And they get defenseman John Moore. And John Moore really helped them on the blue line during the remainder of the regular season. Wasn't very good in the playoffs, though. So he'll look to have a bright future with the Rangers. So it was a really interesting year. After they made these trades, their scoring started to go through the roof a little bit, and they were tremendous toward the end of the year. And though they didn't meet the expectations that were thrown upon them, they did manage to finish 6th in the Eastern Conference and get into the playoffs on the second to last day, with a 4-3 overtime win versus the Carolina Hurricanes, 12th overall in the league. And they actually were pretty good in the playoffs, even though it was a second-round elimination. They held out the Washington Capitals, defeating them in 7 games, very surprisingly. But then they were burnt out by that series. They then lost in 5 games to the Boston Bruins. So not a good end for a season that in which the expectations were high enough that many people started expecting them to maybe win the Stanley Cup. Now, people forget Rick Nash doesn't have a lot of playoff experience, so that's why his play wasn't very good in the playoffs. However, during the regular season, he was good for the most part. He ended the season as their leading goal scorer, but toward the final stretch, that's when his inconsistency started. And Derek Stepan ended the season as their leading point scorer, 48 points in 48 games, 18 goals. They still don't have him signed, unfortunately. They'll look to rectify that at some point. But they did make a lot of moves they didn't make too many player moves this offseason. This offseason's basically been more about re-signing their own guys. They didn't have a first-round pick in this year's draft, or a second-round pick for that matter. So it really was all about signing from within. They signed Ryan McDonagh to a 4-year deal. They signed Carl Hagelin to a 2-year deal. They signed Matt Zuccarello to a 1-year deal. They still got to get Derek Stepan signed, and they don't have a lot of cap space left to do it, considering that the Rangers have opted not to use a compliance buyout on Brad Richards like many people thought they would. But the real big deal from the Rangers this year was the change in coaching. The New York Rangers fire head coach John Tortorella, and in his place, they bring in Alain Vigneault, former head coach of the Vancouver Canucks, which is quite funny because John Tortorella would then go on to become the head coach of the Vancouver Canucks. So kind of a coaching trade, if you will. It's almost like a trade. And honestly, I think it's a great move. I'll be honest, I was a little surprised that Tortorella did not get maybe another year to prove himself. I thought they were going to give him one last year to maybe try to get them in the playoffs and get them to win the cup. But then again, if they did that, they wouldn't have gotten Alain Vigneault now, would they? And this is a guy who for 3 straight years head coaching the Vancouver Canucks, he and his team were absolutely the highlight reel as far as offense goes among teams. They were the top offensive team for 3 years straight. But he couldn't get them to the promised land. He came close in 2011, but they lost in 7 games to the Boston Bruins, 1 game away. So, but since then, they've lost in the first round 2 years in a row, and that hasn't helped the organization. So Vigneault was fired by the Canucks and now is with the New York Rangers, and he'll be expected to get this offense in shape. He really will, and he's also very player-friendly, so he won't have any problems with the media. As far as this offseason goes for the Rangers, though, as far as players go, it wasn't that active. Not a very big offseason for them, which is the first time in forever. In fact, the New York Rangers would be so active in the free agency for so many years, which is why they created the cap. The New York Rangers were the very reason why the cap was created, because of all the signings Glenn Sather would do to these huge contracts, and none of these players would provide. But before we get to that, Alain Vigneault was also not the only coaching switch they would make. They also got in a new associate coach and 2 new assistant coaches. Scott Arniel, former head coach of the Columbus Blue Jackets, he is the new associate coach. And the 2 new assistant coaches, Ulf Samuelsson, former defenseman, and Dan Lacroix, former enforcer for the New York Rangers in the NHL. So they'll be expected to help the team out on the power play, as well as continue to allow them to play a solid defensive game. Now, again, with the players that they would get this year and depart, not very active. There was only one real significant departure for the New York Rangers, and I said this before, that was a departure of their big trade deadline acquisition from the San Jose Sharks, Ryan Clowe. He proved to be just a rental player. Rangers did not have the money to sign him back. He went on to sign with the arch rival New Jersey Devils to a lengthy contract. Other than that, though, nothing tremendous as far as departures go. They made a trade with the Matt Gilroy, he is gone once again. He signs with the Florida Panthers. Steve Eminger, Roman Hamrlik, they're both unrestricted free agents. They will not be back. Michael Sauer, very unfortunate with him. He was definitely one of the Rangers' more solid blue liners and was really developing into a strong player, but he has not gotten any better with his concussion problems, and therefore the Rangers cannot bring him back, and it's a shame because he will prove to be a pretty big loss on that blue line, in my opinion. And then they made a couple of they also made a couple of trades. They traded some players out. Chris Newberry, who had been their star in the American Hockey League for a while, but never could take it to the next level in the NHL. He was dealt to the Philadelphia Flyers. Rangers got defenseman Danny Syvret in that deal to add a little bit of depth. They also brought in defenseman Aaron Johnson. He comes over from the Boston Bruins. He'll also figure to be a 7th or 8th guy. Add some depth there too. And then the Rangers did make some depth signings up front as well. Hell, they brought in Benoit Pouliot coming over from the Tampa Bay Lightning. He's definitely going to add some depth for this team. He has not lived up to his 4th overall draft status from 2005. However, he has proven himself to be one of the better depth players in the National Hockey League. He really showed it a couple seasons ago when he played for the Boston Bruins. And last year, he actually did see some time as a part of the top 6, playing with Vincent Lecavalier and Ryan Malone or Teddy Purcell. So that was a big step for him, and he'll probably be on the 4th line for the Rangers this year. He won't have that luxury of being a top 6 guy here in New York. So that'll be a big thing. The Rangers have way too much depth to allow him to move up. And then the other signing, they also wanted to get a 4th line center, considering Aaron Asham is now going to be demoted to like the 14th forward, and Darryl Powell will probably not even play a game. Same with Taylor Pyatt. He's getting demoted to 13th forward. They needed a 4th line center, and they went out and got Dominic Moore. Dominic Moore last played in the NHL in 2011-2012, a season split between the Tampa Bay Lightning and the San Jose Sharks. Most recently, the San Jose Sharks did not play last season because he wanted to take the season off to be with his wife, who unfortunately lost her life to cancer. God rest her soul, and God bless Dominic Moore, wishing all the best for him. So he figured, why not return to the place where he started his career, signing for 1 year, same as Benoit Pouliot. And he's a depth guy. When he's on the top of his game, he's a defensive center, and a guy who plays very strong on the penalty kill, a hard worker. Rangers know Dominic Moore very well from 2005-2006 when he was a rookie. So they'll definitely be very happy to have him back. He was also a former fan favorite that year. And then the Rangers did make a couple of other trades as well. Maybe they're what is considered probably their biggest acquisition, a guy who they acquired in a trade but also signed as a restricted free agent to a 1-year deal. They brought in Justin Falk from the Minnesota Wild, a defenseman, big 6'5" defenseman. They trade away the rights to forward Ben Ferriero, as well as a 6th-round draft pick. Ferriero would then go on to sign with the Vancouver Canucks. He would not sign with the Minnesota Wild. But Justin Falk signed on the same day as Carl Hagelin. This is a guy who adds some stability on defense. It'll be in big question whether he'll be the 6th or 7th guy. He's definitely capable of being a 5th, 6th, or 7th defenseman. Assumingly, he may just start the year as a 7th guy, but when he does play, this is a guy who loves to play the body, big hitter, a defensive-style defenseman, so he won't be doing a lot of scoring on the blue line, which is really mostly what the Rangers' blue line consists of, defensive defensemen. So Justin Falk will definitely help them in that regard, basically fill the role that Stu Bickle had been expected to fill, but had a rough year last year and didn't do so. So a good acquisition in my opinion. I like Justin Falk. I think he'll be a solid player for the New York Rangers. However, there was one other trade the New York Rangers made that I think really goes unnoticed and in my opinion could prove to be the biggest trade acquisition for the Rangers this year. This could be the guy that could prove to be their blockbuster acquisition / signing in the future. They acquired forward Danny Cristo from the Montreal Canadiens in exchange for forward Christian Thomas. Last year, Christian Thomas was the Rangers' second best prospect, but they wanted to add a little more chemistry. And last year, Danny Cristo was Montreal's, I believe, 8th best prospect. But now look at him. He had a humongous year last year in college. And this is a guy who has unbelievable hands and solid speed. He is definitely going to be a skills player in the National Hockey League for years to come. And he has chemistry with both Derek Stepan and Chris Kreider. He has experience playing with both of them. So don't be surprised if we do see him playing a couple games at some point this season, even if it's right at the beginning of the year, and maybe even stabilize himself as a regular in the roster if he plays well. He is, as of now, the Rangers' top prospect. But that now leads us to some of the questions for the New York Rangers. Will their power play improve under head coach Alain Vigneault? That has been the big problem for them for the last couple of years. They really need to get their power play in check. They absolutely do. Can Brad Richards have a comeback year? Last year, terrible year for him. Played well toward the end of the year, and he went on a 6-game scoring streak at the final 6 games of the year, but then underachieved in the playoffs, only 1 goal, and he was scratched for the final 2 games against the Boston Bruins, was replaced by Chris Newberry, who again is now a Philadelphia Flyer. So that'll be really the 2 big questions for the Rangers. Also, can Mark Stahl get himself back in shape after the eye injury? They're really hoping he can get back into full form. If not, the Rangers are going to have some problems on defense. They absolutely will. How soon will it take for Carl Hagelin and Ryan Callahan to get back into the lineup? They're out with off-season shoulder surgeries, at least to start the year. So we'll see what happens to them. And then probably the biggest question of all, probably more concerning for next year, who will they re-sign within the season? Ryan Callahan is an unrestricted free agent. Henrik Lundqvist is an unrestricted free agent. Dan Girardi, Derek Brassard, Brian Boyle, they're unrestricted free agents, although many expect Brian Boyle to be gone after this year or midway through the year. And then Michael Del Zotto is a restricted free agent. So they have a lot of options for the upcoming year. Same with Matt Zuccarello. And again, they still got to get Derek Stepan signed. Who are they going to get him re-signed? Hope so, because if they do, if they get Derek Stepan re-signed, if Derek Brassard plays like he did last year when coming over, and if Brad Richards can get his game back in shape, the Rangers are going to be really deep at center. They're going to have 3 guys who all have top-line center potential. They absolutely will. Now, taking a look at the Rangers' top 10 prospects, I'd say it's deeper than the Carolina Hurricanes, but that's about it of the teams so far. The New Jersey Devils, New York Islanders, and Columbus Blue Jackets all deeper. You know, they have Danny Cristo, again, is number 1. Number 2, Dylan McIlrath. Brady Shea. Number 3, Samuel Noro. These are mostly guys who are defensive players. Marek Hrivik, who could get a shot this year. But really the guy on this list that really impresses me, there's really no looking past it, is the number 1 prospect, right winger Danny Cristo. Again, unbelievable hands and a guy who's going to be part of a great future for the New York Rangers for years to come. The player on the New York Rangers now that needs to pick up his game in order for the Rangers to be better this year, no question, has to be Brad Richards. Terrible year last year. Again, I already talked about him. Underachieved during the regular season. Only played his best in the beginning of the year, the first week of the year. So if the Rangers are going to be a playoff team, Brad Richards needs to get back in shape. He has one more chance to do it. Otherwise, he will most likely be bought out. Are the Rangers a playoff team? Yes, they are. Again, they're very deep at center. Their forward core is great. Even just with the injuries, they have a good situation with JT Miller and Danny Cristo even. Their defense is as solid as ever, and their goaltending, no denying the goaltending of Henrik Lundqvist, that's for sure. So they are a playoff team. All right, guys, that'll do for episode 29 of Hockey on the Spot. Join me again tomorrow when we talk about the Philadelphia Flyers. So until then, this has been Hockey on the Spot with Brandon Barenfeld. I'm Brandon Barenfeld. Join me again tomorrow. Thank you and have a great day.